You can't imagine what it was like to finally play a Jedi Knight growing up. Swinging your saber around and striking down countless stormtroopers. It gave my 5-year-old self that power fantasy I saw way back in Return of the Jedi. And unlike Dark Forces where my dad held my hands, I remember playing the game all on my own. With cheats, of course. I mean, come on. It's an unforgiving 90s shooter. Plus, I remember flying around being fun. In any case, it was an important game for me when I was like 5 or 6 years old. Big fan of Star Wars, got to use the lightsaber, first 3D game I think I played, good memories. But revisiting the game as part of my retrospective journey has been an interesting experience to say the least.
Very intriguing.
And I don't just mean interesting in a negative way necessarily. Like, there are some noteworthy things about the game. The jump to 3D, becoming a Jedi, putting a good amount of effort into the story, and more. That said, also interesting in a not so positive way. But before diving into those topics and seeing how the game has aged for me, I want to say it again that I'm revisiting these games to see their significance. What interesting ideas and experiences they offer to me decades since I last played them. Having said all that, let's take a brief look at the game. The game was released in 1997, 2 years after Dark Forces. You return to play as Kyle Katarn. He's on his own personal mission to find Jarek, a dark Jedi who both murdered his father and his Jedi comrade. He's after the value of the Jedi so he can absorb its power and become the new Emperor. Of course, you have to stop him. And that's by becoming a Jedi Knight, hence the title.
Use it well.
Gameplay-wise, it's pretty obvious that it looks like a whole new game compared to the first. Unlike Doom 2, which basically looks and plays like the first game, except a couple new weapons and new missions and bigger maps, Jedi Knight though, sequel to the quote-unquote Doom clone, went above and beyond compared to Doom and went all in on the 3D. A decision no doubt inspired by Quake, released in 1996, which was one of the first early 3D shooters. On the combat side, you get your standard weapons and heavy weapons, but of course, we know what are the real stars of the show. Your lightsaber and force powers. Some force powers to help you get around places, others for support or harm. You'll be fighting gangsters, the Tusken Raiders, the exotic wildlife, the Empire halfway into the game, and the Dark Jedi who act as bosses in the game. Similar to the first game, the locations generally feel like they have a sense of purpose. It doesn't always make sense, even for Star Wars standards, but compared to the other shooters like Quake, the locations seem to serve some real in-world function, instead of just being combat arenas. And those are the basics of the game. An ambitious sequel with a much bigger emphasis on story, making that leap into 3D, and giving players that first real taste of lightsaber combat. Okay, that doesn't count. And I did say first real taste of lightsaber combat. So we know what the game is. Now, what about the things that jumped out for me? The things that are worth exploring and talking about. Let's first dive in on the gameplay side of things. The transition to 3D was no small feat. In fact, they actually used the same engine from the first game. Yeah, they apparently took this engine that looks like Doom and put out an entirely 3D rendered game that looks nothing like the first game. The result is a much more tangible world with spatial depth, which makes it easier to explore and platform. Something that would have been much harder to do in 2.5D spaces, especially when you have to use force jump and more to get around tough places. While there are undeniable benefits to gameplay, and it's just an impressive technical leap, I do have some issues with the 3D direction. The first being aesthetics. There's just something about the angular shapes that look uncanny and weird. every early 3D game suffered from this crude, blocky, unappealing look. I can't think of a game from that period that holds up well visually. While it's technically impressive, and no doubt wowed players and critics back then in the 90s, I have to admit, I think it doesn't have the same charm the first game had. There is something about the retro 2.5D look and feel that I wish we could have gotten more of. And there are some Duke Nukem and Doom mods that kinda hint at what a more faithful sequel to the first game could have been like. And despite getting that charm I wanted from Dark Forces, with some new weapons and a basic lightsaber system, I get it. Quake changed the landscape, and putting out a Doom-like game in that same year would have made LucasArts look slow to the competition. Yes, Duke Nukem came out the same year as Quake, yet it has a ton of personality to stand out and be remembered to this day.
You guys suck.
While the mods are neat fan creations, they're basically just weapons and skin mods that bring back the charming aesthetics. But I realize business-wise, it wouldn't have made much sense for LucasArts, and to be fair, the platforming and exploration would have been hard to do in 2.5D spaces. Heck, I can't imagine what lightsaber combat duels would be like in 2.5D. Probably not as advanced or flexible as a 3D game. Something else that bugged me was the death animations. I praise Dark Forces for having some satisfying, lively, and expressive death animations. It's just very animated in the first title. Mainly because, well, it's animated. Animated sprites to be specific. With 2D, you can go wild with the animations and reactions. But with Jedi Knight, I'm not that big of a fan with the death animations. They come off very, I don't know, unremarkable? Most enemies just faceplant the ground. There are a few exceptions that thankfully have a bit more oomph to their death animations. The Gamoran guards have an amusing death animation, though sadly they only appear in one level. There's these Imperial Commandos that topple backwards rather dramatically, but they only show up in the last 2 hours in very small numbers. These aren't major complaints, more of a pet peeve, and to be fair, a ton of 3D games this period share the same crude death animations. But another pet peeve that didn't sit well for me was the creepy vibes this game gave. This mainly applies to the 4th mission, but this game definitely has an eerie feel to it. This vast, open, and just empty world always unnerved me. It almost feels like you're on some desolate planet, or a post-apocalyptic one, where civilizations just disappeared entirely, save for the architecture and, well, raiders. The vast bodies of water also just creep me out. They're just big and empty. And if it's not empty, there's these water monsters. And these huge jellyfish just swimming around trying to kill you. But Jedi Knight wasn't the only game that indulged in this creepiness. Quake a year earlier embraced a disturbing world look. Intentionally, yes, but I can't think of a game that didn't look desolate and empty until maybe Half-Life, when they made the world look more lived in. Despite not being a fan of the general look, and the downgrades in death animations, and the creepy vibes the game gave me, I found that the game did make good use of 3D in a few impressive ways, such as the scale. It's a really neat transition and reveal. I just wish there were more moments like these because size and scale tend to be a strength of 3D. Another 3D moment that I thought the game took advantage of was the set piece level.
Kyle, you must get to your ship.
You're trapped inside a cargo ship that's fallen to its doom, and you have to navigate through the chaos to reach your intern ship. All while stuff is blowing up all around you. And if you don't escape in time, yeah, that happens. It's a tense, exhilarating level, and I can't imagine ever doing that in 2.5D. Having said all that, while I do miss the charm of the first game's aesthetics and death animations, going the 3D route made sense business-wise, but more importantly, it made sense for gameplay reasons. Jedi Knight is just a much more free, open, flexible sprawling game, even if it has some rough edges that every early 3D game had. I do, however, want to dedicate the next segment to the level design, which somehow feels more labyrinthian than the first game. It somehow felt like one step forward, one step backwards. On one hand, 3D rendering that makes it easier to navigate around the world, that's great. On the other hand, level designers who still go out of the way to make the levels obtuse and utterly confusing? Not so great. I can't deny that it's not satisfying to figure out where you're supposed to go, how at first you're stumped on even where to proceed, but slowly and surely you piece together your surroundings, and then you finally make it to where you were supposed to go. It feels like you solved a puzzle. Much more so than the first game, where spatial awareness was more limited and levels were less vertical and creative. That said though, the amount of head-scratching level design throughout the 6 hours of gameplay did wear me down. So here's just a few examples. The first being Katarn's home. While the interior was confusing with the poor lighting and the labyrinth-style home, with so many different floors and rooms, there was one point that really left me baffled. I'm faced with this body of water outside his home and these structures. I wasn't sure what to do, but I jumped down and saw a room that I couldn't seem to get into, so I went through the house 3 different times, trying to find some hidden way in. But no, despite those efforts, I couldn't find a way in, and after going through a video walkthrough, apparently there was a secret underwater passage I missed that led me down and into the room. Granted, it is a neat way of getting into the room, but there's just no hints or anything to suggest that maybe there's a way in through the water. Like, maybe as soon as you hit the water, Kyle should say something like, there must be a way to get inside underwater. The next example is Baron's Fortress. The Baron's Dark Fortress is both impressive and frustrating. Impressive in its scale, but frustrating because you're told to get inside, somehow. Without any hints or help, I just found myself circling around the fortress several times. There wasn't any door or visible way of walking inside. Conventional wisdom would be that you would have to go around the tower and find some controls to open the door or something from outside. And I thought I did find it at one point, but it just led me to a room full of stormtroopers. So I tried something else. Something unconventional. And yeah, apparently you were supposed to do that. Which meant that I wasted 20 minutes of just aimlessly wandering around the map, when I could have just rushed in and got inside within 2 to 3 minutes. And of course, the confusing level design doesn't end there in that mission. You need to get inside this room, which is locked, but how do you get inside? You need to jump onto this gate, and then slip into the ceiling, so then you can drop down the control room and unlock it. Yeah, it's ingenious, but also, how would you ever know this? The last example I want to bring up is when you first arrive on a Lost Jedi planet. You're supposed to get across this bridge and into the main outpost, but it's shielded by a force field. I vaguely remember this weird pipe under the bridge 5 minutes earlier, but I had no idea how to even get there. After aimlessly getting nowhere, I looked it up online, again, and yeah, you're supposed to have this elevator rise up, so you can drop down, cut through the metal grating, and finally get across the pipe. There's a lot of other confusing levels in this game, often requiring vertical thinking, which becomes essential when you get force jump. Yes, again, it's satisfying to somehow figure your way out of a confusing, unclear situation, but the level designs are still headache-inducing. Somehow that's been surpassed by the game's surprising difficulty. Difficulty that had me save scum throughout the entire game. I got my ass handed to me in this game. And at first, it didn't feel like that. The first few levels on Narshada were a decent challenge, but as soon as you leave the planet, the entire game feels all too punishing. So much so, I think this is the most Savescum game I ever played. By Savescum, I mean excessively quick saving and reloading it because boy do you die a lot in this game. Including taking too much damage where you're better off just reloading. That's because so many encounters take place in tight spaces, so you're bound to take several hits. You'd think your lightsaber would help you in confined spaces, but the reality is quite the opposite. Deflecting blaster bolts is difficult and doesn't actually do much. It seems like it takes 7 or more hits to take them down. Honestly, I don't even know for sure, because I just got impatient and... yeah. I don't think I ever saw a stormtrooper in the entire game die to its own deflected shot. Then there's the platforming, which really is just trial and error most of the time. Missing a jump or slipping off an edge, and you're guaranteed a death, or losing a sizable chunk of your health. And both factors aren't helped by the game's stingy health pickups. Until you get Force Heal, you're forced to rely on the scarce health pickups in the game. Recovered health, which can easily disappear in the next encounter. Now, I'm not criticizing the ability to save manually. I can't imagine if Jedi Knight stuck to the 3 life system from the first game, where running out of lives meant restarting the entire level again. I'm just pointing out that the game has a lot of tough encounters, deadly platforming, and lack plentiful health pickups, which encourages save scumming. And I'm not sure if that's necessarily good campaign design. There was one issue with the quick saving mechanic I came across in the game, where I dropped down and found myself trapped in a corner with an explosive barrel, and I couldn't destroy them without blowing myself up. Nor could I jump back out. So I decided to heal myself as soon as I can after the explosion. After several failed attempts, I miraculously managed to heal myself just before the second barrel exploded. Oof. Regarding boss fights though, I think the hardest boss I died to the most was Pike. Oh sure, you think his smaller frame would make him more fragile, but I swear he's so hard to hit. And yet he still packs a ton of punch though. And after dying like 17 times, I just had to cheat. But hilariously enough, I found out why I had such a hard time fighting Pike and the many other bosses. During my playthrough of Mysteries of the Sith, the next game I'm gonna cover, there's these 2 Sith Guardians who seemed impossible to take down, no matter how long or often I landed a hit on them. But then I went to the controls menu and discovered you can use a heavy saber swing attack. Yeah, apparently I never used it, and boy, I could have beaten all those bosses so much easier and faster. Then again, can you really blame me when the alternate fire button is mapped to the Z button? The fight with Bok though was a pretty annoying affair. He's the second to last boss in the game and his shtick is just bunny hopping endlessly, which I don't think I need to explain why it's incredibly exhausting to fight. Otherwise, the rest of the bosses were, yes, crude, but decent challenges. Also, maybe I'm not complaining much with Jarek, because I cheesed him. To conclude, the A2 manual saves neigh on how much more difficult the game is that it encourages save scumming. Up to that point, Jedi Knight was the hardest game I ever played, I think. Thankfully though, the game not only got easier on my second try, but it also was much more of a visually appealing experience with the remaster. As I was writing the script, I came across a mod that apparently remastered the game. As in, it made the game look and play a bit more appealing. Like, okay, it's not gonna look spectacular, or even stand side by side with Jedi Outcast or Jedi Academy. But I have to admit, it's some impressive fan dedication, and I found the remaster a major improvement over the vanilla game. I avoided using the high-res texture mods in the first playthrough, mostly because it was just too confusing to install them. You had to download like 3 or 4 different things, and the instructions were really confusing. Luckily for me, while writing the script, I found an easy to install remaster mod. I'll link it below in case you ever want to play Jedi Knight, but with more pleasing visuals. And I think you should. Gone are the angular shapes that plagued early 3D game models. Kyle's model not only looks better rounded, but he actually looks like Kyle in the cutscenes and later games, not some redhead. Again, nothing visually on par with Jedi Outcast or Jedi Academy, but still impressive. I even like the new blaster effects. They're even more advanced than the ones in the later games. Despite a few performance issues where there's too many enemies on screen, I'd highly recommend playing a game with this mod. Again, link below. It's simple to install. With that said, now I'd like to finally get into the story. Which you're probably wondering, why did I take this long to get to it? Yes, I know. While most games focus on the gameplay and story second, I often find myself remembering the story long after I finish the game. It depends on the game and genre, of course. But I want to end on Jedi Knight's narrative because, well, there was a lot of potential. But despite the basic setup, there were several things that felt undercooked.
A lost opportunity.
Now, I didn't touch on the story in the first game because there hardly was any. Kyle and Jan just go around trying to find the Dark Troopers, stop the mastermind, and get their reward. The end. There really was no character building or inner conflicts for Kyle, but the leap in 2D to 3D in the sequel extended to the story, and how ambitious the story also became. How so? First, a synopsis. It opens up with a Jedi called Ram, captured by Jarek and the 7 Dark Jedi. He's being interrogated so Jarek can find the Valley of the Jedi.
Morgan Katan!
Jarek learns that Kyle's father has a map, and Ram tries to take on the Dark Jedi but is defeated. Cut to Nar Shaddaa where Kyle is tracking down Jarek, but his contact, AT-88, double-crosses you and wants you to decipher an encrypted disk he found at Kyle's home. Kyle refuses, and after blasting his arm off and getting the data disk, you catch up with your pilot, Jan.
What would you do without me, Kyle?
And get off the planet. While healing up, you get visions from the slain Jedi who tells you to go to your father's place so you can read the disc. The disc reveals itself to be a hologram of your dad instructing you to take a lightsaber he's been hiding so you can stop Jarek.
Use it well. Use it for good.
You try to find 88 at Jarek's Dark Fortress, but instead bump into one of his minions, the first Dark Jedi, Yun. You defeat him and he expects you to kill him.
Kill me! Isn't that what you do to Dark Jedi?
But instead, you decide to show mercy and spare him. After you escape, you continue to track 88, who's on a cargo ship awaiting his payment. You catch him off guard, but
I finally get my chance to repay you.
quelle surprise, he's been decapitated by the Dark Jedi who were supposed to pay him. You defeat his killers and use 88's head to locate the Valley of the Jedi, which is already being excavated. You're about to enter the main site when you're ambushed by Maul, one of the Dark Jedi who Ram in the opening cut in half. If you're wondering how he's still alive and floating, he's yeah. Apparently he's using his anger to keep himself alive and levitate. Fascinating. You defeat him and unlike Yun, Kyle kills him because he insults his father.
He gave him a sweet, slow death. A death worthy of a coward!
Jarek walks in and congratulates Kyle on his kill because, dark side. He orders you to kill Jan, who's been captured. And you refuse to, which leads to Jarek sending you and a cargo ship collapsing into a chasm. You manage to escape with your ship, but you crash land and bump into Saris and Yoon. At your lowest point, Bok hilariously smashes your lightsaber with a rock. Yeah, a rock. Apparently you can smash a lightsaber, the legendary and iconic weapon of the Sith and the Jedi, with some random rock. And of course, it's by the jokes of the Dark Jedi crew.
Enough of this!
It is a shame that Bok doesn't use a big rock during the boss fight like an ability. Huh, why does that sound familiar?
I'm gonna let you down and leave you flat!
Saris tells Bok to scram so she can finish the job, but then suddenly Yoon stops her. He argues that it's not honorable to kill you without a proper duel.
Why? He is a Jedi. He deserves a battle.
He dies, and in a unique twist, you use Yoon's lightsaber. You defeat Saris and make your way into the excavation site. Meanwhile, Jarek is cocooning himself to absorb the Force energy? Sure, why not? You rescue Jan, but Bok, disguised as a statue,
Mine too!
attacks you. You defeat him too, and move on to Jarek, where the final duel takes place. After you defeat him, Jarek refuses to surrender, and Kyle emerges as the victor. Jarek then explodes in a colorful display as the Force spirits he absorbed are freed and allowed to leave the valley. And Kyle ends the game with him erecting a statue of his father, and Ram as tribute before end credits. Now before getting into the character and story, I noticed some iconic influences in the game. The opening shot is just evocative of the opening in A New Hope, and I'm sure there's more Star Warsian influences, but more interestingly is the writer and director admitting that he drew influences from the good, the bad, and the ugly, and The Seven Samurai. Two movies heavily influenced me at the time. One was The Seven Samurai, the other movie, and it sounds crazy maybe, was the good, the bad, and the ugly for the race and search for gold in a barren world, which was replaced with the Valley of the Jedi, while The Seven Samurai for the Seven Dark Jedi. Nothing much under the surface either. Just 7 sword-wielding individuals, I guess. I will say something about the 7 Dark Jedi. I really appreciate them not only having their own look, style, and quirks, but they also have their own lightsaber colors. Not the uniform red lightsabers every Sith and Inquisitor has, because evil. We got yellow, orange, purple, and even blue lightsabers. I do also like seeing how Kyle was using a different lightsaber color. Up to that point, you never saw a protagonist use any other lightsaber color other than blue and green. As for the story, for a 90s game, you have to give it credit, since most shooters didn't put in the same effort. I can't think of any shooter at that point that put in the same effort. FMVs, story, characters, not really. Only Jedi Knight.
Excellent!
But judging it critically and from today, okay, yeah, the acting isn't great.
Strike her down and realize your true destiny as a Dark Jedi, your true power!
It's hokey and hammy, but oddly enough, I actually found the characters like Kyle likable and relatable.
Jan, what a pleasant surprise!
What would you do without me, Kyle?
I'd be a content old man.
Again, it's not great, but hey, I found Kyle more charming than what we got in the prequels.
What?
Plus, how can you not enjoy the schlock from Bok? While the acting is a guilty pleasure, the writing is just lackluster.
Somehow I expected more.
It's a basic setup, but the character motivations were sadly underdeveloped. Before getting to Kyle Katarn, there are some issues I want to get to with the other characters. First off, I do wish Yoon, the first Dark Jedi you face, and was spared in your first encounter, decided to save Kyle from Ceres's blade, not because of some honor.
He is a Jedi. He deserves a battle.
But because Kyle, spared him earlier? That feels a bit more relatable and plausible than a young hothead thinking the rules of dueling must be adhered to.
The sacred Jedi text!
It also would have been more rewarding too, to see how your past actions saved Yoon, and in return, Yoon saving you. Second, I'm not exactly sure why Jarek killed off AT-88. It wasn't like Jarek had a score to settle or some grudge against the droid. I mean, the droid gave him the map to the Valley of the Jedi.
Excellent, AT-88. The Valley of the Jedi will soon be mine.
And what's the harm in compensating him for his services? Did Jarek forget to save up a portion of the Galactic Empire's budget for 88's services? I guess Jarek just had him destroyed because, evil. Which I don't find all that interesting. I know, it's a villain trope to kill your own subordinates, but at least with Vader, the Admiral made an arrogant mistake by flying too close to Hoth.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
So that makes sense. And Kylo Ren, while he never killed any of his underlings, he did intimidate them, and he was a petulant child, so that also made sense. But Jarek? He wasn't punishing 88 for failing him, which 88 didn't.
Excellent, AT-88.
And Jarek definitely isn't someone who seems to be emotionally unstable.
I am not emotionally unstable!
But what about Kyle, the star of the show? Well, on the surface, it looks like your basic hero journey. Someone evil has wronged you, and so you must avenge your father and bring the villains to justice before they become too powerful. While it does have far more meat than the first game, which had you stop a big bad scientist you never met before, there's still very little meat around the bones with the sequel. I just don't think they really took advantage of Kyle's motivation. I think the problem with Kyle's motivations begin at the very start of the game, when 88 threatens Kyle.
Tell me what it is, and these gentlemen won't have to indulge their darker side.
The dark side? I've been there.
What does that mean? What dark side? In the last game, he was fighting for the rebellion. Was he talking about when Kyle served in the Empire? And if he means he has a dark past, that too never shows up. Something the game touts is its morality system, even the writer and director saying it was one of the neatest, most involving aspects of the game. How doing bad deeds will cause Kyle to join the dark side and get the bad ending, by killing Jan and becoming the Emperor at the end. The gameplay doesn't actually change though, except for you fighting Yoon instead of Ceres, and oddly enough, there's a lot of missing dark side cutscenes, like how you met up with Yoon after you landed your ship, or anything with Jarek. I can't help but feel like the dark side path was rushed, given the lack of cutscenes except when you kill Jan and sit on your throne. The one positive about the ending is that it ends on a poetic note. It's not great, but I do like how you start the game with Kyle reminiscing over a hologram of his father, and then end with Kyle watching it one last time.
I want you to remember, son, when you're at the academy, how very proud I am of you.
Before discarding it. The idea is nice, just not the execution. Now with the game's morality system, it's fundamentally flawed from a gameplay and story's perspective. How do you become a Dark Jedi, you ask? By killing enough civilians in the first half of the game. Okay, but the question is, why would you kill civilians? Like, never is there a reason why you would ever do that. Unless you just wanted to be some sicko. Or hey, maybe you were just some kid, and it's just fun doing it because you just can in a video game. But the problem is, for one, you're not presented moral choices like in Knights of the Old Republic, where you get story and gameplay benefits from your actions.
Slusk's dead, but Godo's still my boss. I'm shipping you to Nar Shaddaa, Jedi. Dead or alive. If you don't want to defend yourself, that's your choice.
Yes, you do see the outcome of your actions, but only towards the end of the game. Whereas in Knights of the Old Republic, you saw the outcomes of your actions rather quickly. Anyone just gunning down these weird looking civilians wouldn't know that would cause them to get the dark side ending. You might even get civilians killed. Accidentally. And you wouldn't know that's leading you down to the path of the dark side as well. In the director's defense though, he argued that being good always requires care, whereas being evil can be as simple as just being careless or doing what's expedient. My counter-argument though, again, considering the limitations back then, is that the game doesn't make it clear to you that you shouldn't be taking out these weird-looking NPCs. And story-wise, it doesn't make much sense for Kyle to go from cocky, charming, friendly guy,
Well, I think a visit's in order. Don't you?
to best friend murdering Emperor wannabe. There should have been an enticing reason to go dark side. A reason, a bad one mind you, but still a reason to indulge in killing civilians. Maybe to become strong enough to defeat Jarek.
Good. Use your aggressive feelings, boy. Let the hate flow through you.
The power of the dark side is never brought up by Kyle or his Ghostmaster. And if you're wondering, the dark side powers don't seem all that impressive. Force choke, force lightning, and others seem to take way too long to kill enemies. You're better off just using force heal, which is the light side path and just offers far more utility. Or you can just use your weapons if you want that destructive ranged option. What could have made Kyle's descent to the dark side far more compelling and plausible is if they really hit home Kyle's loss and his desire to avenge his father. You'd think that Kyle would have been driven by revenge to kill Jarek, but oddly no. Kyle just seems like he has to stop Jarek because that's what he was due. Imagine if early on, Kyle was this kind of cold and wanted blood, but then during his vision with Ram, he warns Kyle about the dark side and that he has to protect the innocents in his journey. How would it translate into gameplay? I'd include more situations where you had to save civilians from gangsters or the Empire. I know, it happens in this market scene, but that's the only time something like that ever happens in the entire game. The game should have been more clear in conveying its morality system from the start, even warning that allowing civilians to die, whether to the enemies or to your own lightsaber, will make you fall to the dark side in your quest. Regarding Jan, Kyle had no reason to kill his best friend.
Why do I need you, Jarek, when I can take all the power of the valley myself?
Wanting power doesn't correlate with beheading your friend. Killing or letting the defenseless die is bad and wrong. Yes, we all agree on that. But I do think you need to tie it to the gameplay and the story more interestingly and clearly. Motivations matter. Or they should. But what did others think? What did they think about the game 20 years later? Jedi Knight was loved by critics and fans when it was released. But, oddly enough, no one really talks about it anymore. You think a game with a popular and powerful Star Wars brand, the jump from 2D to 3D, and just being the first game you wielded your lightsaber in a 3D space would have, been widely remembered? Even though it got a high aggregate score, and PC Gamer declaring it an instant classic, despite the high praise at the time, it doesn't seem that widely remembered. Even compared to other games, or original IP games without the Star Wars IP backing. Besides the id Software games, games like System Shock, Duke Nukem, and Turok just seem to have much more of a legacy with gaming circles. Heck, Shadow of the Empire, a less well-received game released on Windows and Nintendo 64, is more popular than Jedi Knight. Jedi Knight sold almost 250,000 copies, which I assume wasn't that great. Quake sold 1.1 million copies. But the reason why Quake and Shadow of the Empire sold far more copies simply boils down to them being multi-platform releases. which Jedi Knight was a PC exclusive game. So it was going to see far fewer sales regardless. And it just wasn't as unique or had as much personality as System Shock or Duke Nukem, respectively. Thus, Jedi Knight's legacy isn't that widespread. I think there's another reason why Jedi Knight just hasn't left a legacy, and that was because of a little game from a developer with no name recognition. In fact, it was their first game.
Good morning, and welcome to the Black Mesa Transit System.
Half-Life came out a year later, and the game was praised universally for its immersive, seamless, and realistic level design, and a healthy amount of scripted moments and set pieces. Which is why it probably overshadowed Jedi Knight since then. There were criticisms leveled towards Jedi Knight, ranging from graphics to AI issues from different outlets, but I think the review that I found the most interesting was by Chi-Kong Lee. In his GameCritics.com review, while positive, he criticized the level design and how levels seemed to go on forever. How repetitive and unimaginative the game was for reusing the same unaltered score from the films. He even finds the game too gamey, like weapons and items littering the level, and that the game has too many combat encounters. I don't think that the game's gamey nature is a problem, but it's still interesting to see someone disappointed games haven't become cinematic enough, or done much to break the formula. Like, again, my favorite segment in the game was the set piece escape. That and the lightsaber duels. Which both felt very cinematic. But did I enjoy the game? Well, to be honest, the first playthrough left a bad impression. The amount of times I was stuck on a puzzle, got lost, or Savescum like never before overshadowed the things I enjoyed. I also found the game to lack much charm.
What's happening?
Outside of the full motion videos.
This is gonna cost you a crate load of money you don't have.
The early 3D visuals just hasn't aged well. I actually did enjoy the game quite a bit more on my second playthrough, when I had a better idea of the map layout and knew of the obstacles coming up, which is why I definitely recommend playing the game with a remastered mod. More pleasing on the eyes, and the visual clarity is just going to help you in combat and navigation. Finally though, while I criticize the writing quite a bit, I still appreciate the effort and emphasis on the story, even if it's a bit shallow and underdeveloped like Kyle's potential dark side path. Something of which the next game in the series, Mysteries of the Sith, promised to explore, with Kyle and Morris Jade descent to the dark side. Too bad it was a broken promise.
Feel the power embrace you as your Jedi powers fail you.
Kyle!